So as a quick introduction, I'm Dr. Roy Sugarman. I'm a clinical neuropsychologist, a clinical psychologist, and an expert in peak performance. I'm going to be making a few remarks today on mindfulness and the practice of mindfulness and how it impacts on the neurology of the brain, and give you some insights as to what we found across the world when it comes to the practice of mindfulness and its value for your everyday life. Sure. So Ellen Langer and her colleagues at Harvard, way back in 1988, began to show that the practice of mindfulness in the business context would, first of all, increase productivity, but more importantly, you can imagine, decrease burnout, decrease your sense of the load that you were carrying. And if stress in business is two perceptions, one, how do you perceive your own capacity, and how do you perceive the demands being made on you, mindfulness helps you keep this side going, keeps you understanding your own resources and being able to sort of harvest them and use them effectively. And it also helps you minimize the worry about where this is all going in terms of the demands on you. So not only decreasing the risk of burnout, but actually enhancing your capacity to sustain yourself and therefore be creative. And this carried on in Korea, for instance, where they were interesting. I think it was Park and their colleagues in 1990, picking up on Ellen Langer's work, began to find an increase in productivity in the workplace. Let me give an example of how mindfulness works. If you're, for instance, driving in a motor car and there's a little ping from your SMS, we've worked out in laboratories that the distraction of that, away from mindful driving, for instance, the distraction of that is equivalent to having had 3 beers, sculled them in 5 minutes, and you realize the impact on your driving. In the workplace, let's say you check an email. Oh, I've got to check this email. And then there are 15 other emails in your inbox. You can imagine the distractibility and the loss of focus there. So being mindful, I'm reading this email, I'm ignoring all other emails, and I'm going to stay in the moment with this email and do nothing else, really helps you focus. Now, when your perception of what you're capable of absolutely matches the perception of what you're making the demands on, in other words, one email, and that's what I'm going to do, you're in a state of flow, which means you're not making a great effort. In Japanese, sakeha, which means no work. So mindfulness suggests in the workplace that you're not doing excess work and that you're not being distracted. In other words, you're not drinking 3 beers every 5 minutes in the workplace, although that's some workplaces. I've been in that happens, but ideally you're staying in the moment. There are other concepts there. So if you think about mindful eating, if you go out with a whole lot of people, for every person at your table, you're adding 21% distraction in terms of more calories. So you're sitting there mindfully chewing your food, and somebody says, anybody want a coffee? I'm having a coffee. What about desserts? If you don't want a dessert, I will share a dessert with you. And this is the opposite of mindfulness. And this happens at work all the time. If you're in the workplace and you're focused on your work, but one of your colleagues is having a bad day, talking loudly on the phone, being stressed out about something that happened with the kids, this is presenteeism. Presenteeism is the opposite of mindfulness. In other words, you're coping with bad mood, bad vibes. So staying mindful in the present, not worrying about tomorrow, taking on one task at a time is going to dramatically increase your productivity and massively increase your ability to get through your workday with less stress, more productivity. So some people will complain that mindfulness is not so easy. You can go onto YouTube, you can go onto the web, you can download apps which teach you a whole lot about mindfulness. But here's a quick way to think about mindfulness. Very often we're distracted by something going on outside in the street regularly, like our neighbor's party, or we're distracted by something in the office. And it's like saying, well, don't think about a polar bear. You know, the minute I say polar bear, you're thinking about that white fluffy thing that's hauling seals out of the water. So what you want to do is practice something called go narrow, go wide, which is kind of an introduction to mindfulness. And what you do is you focus for 30 seconds on your bodily sensations, on how anxious you are, the pressure of the chair on your backside or on your back, and whether it's cold or hot. How do you feel? Are you hungry? Are you worried? Do that for 30 seconds and then switch from the narrow focus to wide. Focus on the outside world, on the traffic noises from the highway, on the weather, on the patter of the rain or the wind or your neighbor's noise mowing the lawn. Do that for 30 seconds. Then pull yourself back in to the narrow focus, and then focus again on your bodily sensations, on how worried and how what's going on inside these things in your head. What that does is it uses the frontal lobes, which I mentioned before, part of the gray matter, and it helps you move from the inside of your temporal lobes to the outside, to the inside to the outside. So you're kind of getting into what mindfulness is, focusing on the moment here, focusing on the moment there, and learning to distract yourself and then refocus. Once you've done that for a few weeks, maybe 2-3 weeks, then get into the more heavy mindfulness, the kind of deep meditation, and you're going to reap the benefits. But remember, this is a lifelong practice, and this is something you've got to get good at. And the more you lay down those pathways, the more you make those demands on your brain, the better it's going to be.